I appreciate that you're willing to share your Super Bowl Sunday with us here, your spiritual community. So this month is also the beginning of a new month, and our theme this month is all the colors of love. Love of self, love of God, and love of others. And of course, I spent time trying to figure out which order do we put that in, God, self, others, others, self, God. And I realized since it's all one, it doesn't matter what order I say it in. So we heard those commandments at the beginning of the reading, considered to be the highest commandments that have been given to us, to love the Lord thy God, and second, to love your neighbor as yourself. All three, God, self, and neighbor. So where does that love come from then? And how do we do that? How do we experience that love? In Joel Goldsmith's book, Practicing the Presence, where that reading came from this morning, he talked about the fact that when you see fruit hanging on a tree, that fruit comes from inside the tree out. Nobody goes and hangs fruit on a tree. The fact that it has fruit is because it comes from somewhere within and produces that fruit outward. And so that I take as an example of where our love comes from. It's not something that we gain out there. It's something that we already have within us, and we allow that to move through us, and that becomes the fruit that we have to offer the world. Now, there's some people that may say, well, I don't experience love because my parents didn't love me. I don't experience love because I don't have a partner. I don't experience love because I'm not good enough. But think about that. All of those are things that we think. Those are stories that we are telling ourselves. And the truth is that love is already in there. It's a part of you. Teresa read this morning in the meditation, it's like thanking God for love. It's like thanking God for the air we breathe. It's already given freely. It's already there. Joel Goldsmith also used the example of a spider's web that comes from within the spider and creates the web that it lives on and that provides its food for it. So like the fruit tree, like a spider and its web, love is already within us, and that's what we have to give out into the world. And again, I know some of you might be saying, I'm not feeling it. Where does that feeling come from? Can somebody take love and hand it to you, and then you can stick it inside there and feel it? That's not possible. All of our feelings, no matter what they are, start in here. And often they're connected to what's going on in our head. Our feelings come from the inside out, and the only way to impact them or change them is to figure out what we're thinking and telling ourselves. Now, I know that I'm probably not the only one that's cried when I've watched a movie or read a good book. So sometimes that stuff that's out there incites in us those emotions or those feelings. But again, when we're watching the movie or reading the book or watching a situation in the world out there, it's what we're telling ourselves, even if it's a subconscious message, that creates the feeling and the emotion. So to experience more love in the world means we have to open up within ourselves. We have to get that heart space in us, really feeling the love. So part of that is taking the conscious time to focus within on the love that you already have. As I was thinking through this talk, I was trying to clean off my counter with a dry sponge, and I realized that doesn't work so well. And I think when we expect love to come from the outside in, it's like expecting a dry heart to absorb love. In that same way, that we have to moisten it with our own internal love to prepare it to receive anything more from the outside. And then we can squeeze it out once it's filled and share what we have inside back out. Now, we probably all know that Ernest Holmes and many of the other New Thought teachers and other philosophers have equated what goes on in our thinking and in our emotions with what expresses in our body. And Ernest Holmes has a whole section in the Science of Mind text called Physical Perfection. And in here, he says, as long as we realize that our heart is a living center through which the love of God flows to bless eternity, not only our own lives, but the lives of all whom we contact. As long as we realize this, our heart cannot be troubled. And further on in the same section, he says, thoughts of greed, selfishness, and jealousy cause congestion in various functions of the body. But degenerative thoughts can be turned into creative, energizing, vitalizing ones. Anger can be turned into love, and the very power that has been destroying can be made to build up the entire body. I imagine that everyone in here has experienced anger before. And I imagine you've also experienced love. What it feels like to love someone and to be loved. Which feels better in your body? Love, yeah. Obviously, if we can reduce that stress hormone that comes along with the anger and shift it somehow into love, it has to be better for our bodies. So again, it begins with what is going on in here and how that connects to what we're feeling here. And so I suggest that we begin with self-love and a practice that involves love and self-love. I've already shared before how I sometimes spend time just thinking of every single person I love to help bring that feeling home when I'm ready to center into feeling love again. So we're consciously practicing feeling love, expanding that feeling within ourselves, so that when and if chaos occurs out here, we can still bring ourselves into that center. Because that's where the love begins. It's what's going on inside of us. It's the feeling tone that we move through the world with. So where do we learn about love and what it means or looks like? Some of us might say from our parents or the adults who raised us, and for many people that's a positive thing, but for others, not so much. The other place I've mentioned is books or movies, and as I was thinking about that, what do we learn and what do we see when we're watching these things or reading them, is often that when there's a love interest, and that love interest is usually up on some kind of a pedestal. And the person who loves that love interest is devoted 100% to that love interest, and often to the detriment of their own self. And they give their whole self to whatever that love interest is. And so when we think about self-love, I think that's why we get confused, because we think we need to put ourselves then on a similar pedestal and only devote ourselves to ourselves, and nothing else will matter. We confuse self-love with narcissism. But the truth is, love is not finite. That's a false belief, that we have a limited amount. So we either can love ourselves or we can love someone else. But that's not true. Love is infinite. I had a friend in college who used to say that she didn't want to tell anyone, I love you, because she was saving that phrase for that special someone someday. And she didn't use the phrases like, I love coffee. The one she used was, I love a toaster. She wouldn't say things like that because she felt that to use love in that way would diminish the meaning someday when she said to someone, I love you. And yet what I've discovered, I started to take that on back then. Oh, okay, she was a mentor. But what I've discovered since is that the more I see things and people that I love, the more it grows in me, the more I feel it, that love is not finite. If we say God and love are one, and we say God is everywhere present, that means love is everywhere present. And when we focus on it, it continues to grow. As we focus on it within ourselves, it expands within us and pours out. As we heard in our reading this morning, Joel Goldsmith said, "Let us understand that anything of which we can become aware is a neighbor, whether it appears as a person, a place, or a thing. Every idea in consciousness is a neighbor." And one of the things we're asked to do is love our neighbor as ourself. So again, it's that feeling that we generate within ourselves, and I think it begins with self-love. So what does that look like? We often equate it then with self-care. And self-care or self-love begins again in our thoughts. What kind of self-talk do we have? In the Science of Mind magazine for February this year, there's an article about complaining, and in there he talks about the fact that we think that we feel better if we get it off our chest and complain about something to someone else. But what they've discovered through research is that actually adds to our negative feelings about the world. It doesn't make us feel better. It actually makes us feel worse. And he said not only complaining, but inner eye rolling. Can anyone relate? You know, when we go, oh, geez. Okay, that inner eye rolling that we do. Now, we might not make it apparent out there, but I had to really think about how many times do I do inner eye rolling in a day? And what is that doing to my feeling of love for the world or love in the world? So it's being aware of those sorts of things in addition to looking at what is our spiritual practice and bringing love into that spiritual practice. Allowing ourselves to consciously focus on feeling it, filling up with it, just picturing what brings us love and how we feel love in the world, and then bringing it into a spiritual community. Sharing that among those here and then taking it out. Another idea that was shared with self-love is keeping our promises to ourselves. We often will keep promises to others, but the promises we make ourselves, whether it's about the amount of time we're going to spend in a spiritual practice, or maybe this is exercise is exactly where I was going. How many of us made New Year's resolutions, and have we kept those promises to ourselves? Exercise for me is one of those challenges. So this month, as I was reading in the Spirituality and Health magazine, there's actually an article in here that she calls Moving Toward Joy. And the author is Kalia Kelmanson. And in here she says that the research is clear. From every form of chronic pain or illness, movement enhances energy, reduces pain, and improves the quality of our life. It's just a matter of having the right mindset. If you're doing this because you care about yourself. She says you're following joy. You're looking for movement that brings joy into your life. She said, you're not punishing yourself, and you're not trying to fix your body. That if we come from that perspective, we're bringing to it, she says, a limitation that could be just as limiting as any physical limitation we might be experiencing. Yeah. So we shift how we think about movement, and we seek movement that increases the joy in our life. So we can either think exercise, I should exercise and this body needs to be fixed, or I can follow my joy. What kind of movement, what kind of movement brings me joy, helps me to feel more love? We start where we are, with what movements bring us joy, and then we can increase the amount of movement that brings us joy on a daily basis. So there's all kinds of ideas about self-care and self-love, and today on Facebook, Teresa posted self-care bingo. Nice. Yeah, it was perfect. So I've made a copy for everyone that you can pick up after. I didn't want everybody doing this while I was talking. I'm a teacher at heart. What can I say? But you can take one of these self-care bingo cards home and see if you can't fill this card, if not in a day, at least in a week, and then refill it and refill it and refill it. Lots of different ideas for self-care on the self-care bingo card. So now, what about love of the so-called other? Someone else, another expression of God in the world. Last week we looked at chapter 20 in the Science of Mind text, what the mystics taught. And one of the things that Ernest Holmes says in that chapter is all life is bound together by one common law of love, and love is the self-givingness of spirit. God is in all and through all. So we can hear that and we can nod and go, yeah, that sounds right. That sounds good. My question is, how do we live that? How do we bring that into our everyday life, into our practice of self-love, so that that love gets big enough that we can include the other expressions of God in the world? When we think about a spiritual mind treatment, the first two steps are doing just that. The first step, God is. We can focus on the qualities of God, including that quality that is love. And the second step, I am, he or she or it is. We all are. And we unify everything and everyone with all those qualities that are God. So if necessary, we bring ourselves back into the basic step 1 and 2 of a spiritual mind treatment. Well, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that we're moving into an election year. And there's a lot already going on if we look at the news and what's happening in the world around us. And it is not my place, and I won't even pretend to say how one should vote. That's not my job. But what I think my job is to help us figure out how to move through this year, bringing more love into the world, experiencing more love within ourselves, and seeing love in everyone around us, whether we agree with them or not, on whatever the issue might be. So, steps 1 and 2 of a treatment: God is, I am, they are, just reconnecting with that truth. The second thing, contemplating that love within us, filling up that sponge so it can absorb and squeeze out a lot more love in the world. And in that chapter 20, what the mystics taught us, Ernest Holmes also said, someday we shall learn to lay our burdens on the altar of love. And so burdens, I thought, well, burdens can be anything that looks unlike love in the world. That feels burdensome. So, someday we shall learn to lay our burdens on the altar of love. And so this month, as we focus on love, and this year, as we walk through this experience in our country, I am going to create an altar for love in my home. Now, you can create it in your mind, if you can remember to bring those burdens and lay them there, or create a physical altar that symbolizes love to you. Of course, mine is going to have flowers on it. I love flowers, and they make me happy. They make me smile. So I'll have flowers that could have things that remind me to be compassionate and loving. Symbols that could be a statue or an entity that reminds us of that teaching. It could be a poem. It could be a phrase. Anything, something from the ocean, whatever you need to put on that altar to remind you that here's a place I can lay down my burdens. This is an altar for love. And then consciously, in whatever way, maybe you write it down and you've got an abalone shell and you can burn it right there, or something to dissolve it in. Some way to consciously lay down anything that looks unlike love. To me, that would be a beautiful practice to carry us through, not just this year, but beyond. Again, you'll notice it goes back to what we're thinking. What's going on up here, the stories that we are telling ourselves. So do we move through this year thinking there's going to be winners and losers? Do we move through this year saying, I'm right, and anyone who doesn't think like me is wrong, and I need to do everything I possibly can to make them understand my point of view and see the world my way? Good luck, she said. Well, again, in spirituality and health, this was interesting when I read this, a different article. This one is a book review on the book called You're Not Listening, What You're Missing and Why It Matters by Kate Murphy. And in this book review, apparently they did some research. And in the research, it said, staying open to the possibility that you are wrong, and I would say that you have more that you can learn, has been shown to reduce activity in the amygdala, a part of the brain that prompts us to react to perceived threats. She goes, conversely, by the way of an fMRI scanner, neuroscientists at UCLA's Brain and Creativity Institute found that when research participants with firm political opinions had their beliefs challenged, their brain activity resembled that of someone being chased by a bear. Think about that. Our fear, our response. She said, in that moment, the primitive brain interprets a difference of opinion as being abandoned by the tribe, alone and unprotected, so outrage and fear take over. And so, as we move through a year when we're potentially going to hear opinions that don't match our own, whatever side you might choose to be on, think about what's going on up here and how that reaction is taking place. Are we responding like someone who's being chased by a bear? Or can we stay open to the idea that we might have something we can learn to help reduce that reaction? In the book study that we're doing, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. I keep bringing this up. Even if you're not in the book study, I really encourage everyone to read this. It shows a different way of responding to the world than what we've become used to doing. And in that book, he challenges us to respond in a different way. To instead of saying, well, first of all, a quote from him. In the old story, the story that we're used to, we overcome evil and leave our enemies in the dust, wailing and gnashing their teeth. No more. Everyone is coming along for this ride. In the new story, we understand that everyone left behind impoverishes the destination. That sentence really got me. Everyone left behind, those that we think, oh, we don't need them. We can just move ahead and do this ourselves. Everyone left behind impoverishes the destination. We are all going along for the ride. So how do we live that? How do we make that part of our reality? Ernest Holmes has his own interpretation of the same passage we read this morning from Joel Goldsmith. It's in the Science of Mind text on page 459 if you want to read the entire thing. It's called The Two Great Commandments, and I'm just taking snippets out of that. It's a very good paragraph, a couple paragraphs if you'd like to read it. We are to look for God in each other and love this God. There's a lot more that he says there, and he concludes on the next page, hate begets hate, strife produces strife, love alone overcomes all. So in my mind, the question shifts from how do I win, how do I convince someone to think the way I do, to how do I bring more love into this situation and this interaction. So as I was contemplating this, I started to analyze my own life, and I had to ask myself, has love ever softened me? Have I ever been in a situation where I was, head to head with someone, and has love been able to bring me to a softer place? Has love ever changed my mind? And has love ever healed a situation that I was in? I think those are good questions to contemplate throughout this month. In the book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, the most recent chapter we were studying, he says, facts don't change minds. I have to say that blew me away. I grew up in a family where facts were valued, where if I could get my facts in order and present them to my father, I might have a chance of going on that date that he wasn't going to let me go on or whatever. So to hear that facts don't change minds, in fact, the research he quoted said, the more facts we present to someone who thinks different than us, the stronger they're going to stand in their position. That's the way it works. So what changes minds? What changes the way we think? How much are we going to change what we think with the facts brought to us from somebody else? Think about it. What changes minds? What changes minds, he said, are new experiences that are fitting into a new story. New experiences. When we can experience something different than what we thought was true, that experience can change our thinking and change our minds. So how do we create environments that allow for new experiences, especially if we want to bring more love into the world? Part of what we're doing with the Belong workshops is trying to create experiences among us in this community so we can deepen in our connection and understanding and love for each other. And so one of the things that we're going to do is Friday, I will do a makeup session for the first group that we met from 1 to 3. If you want to still get in and do the second session, which will be Saturday, then let me know and I'll do a makeup on Friday afternoon. Because part of what we're doing is practicing this new way of being right here before we try and take it out into the world. So let me know if you'd be interested in that. Also think about when you're in different situations, how can you bring a new experience to that situation? For me, it's how do I stop defending my point and my rightness and bring an experience of love and acceptance instead? A new experience grounded in this new story of interbeingness that we are all one. This isn't such a new story, but trying to live it and bring it into the reality of our culture's experience is a new experience. So basically, I brought us around full circle. We're back to what Joel Goldsmith said in the reading this morning, and I just want to quote one line. Let us resolve loving our neighbor into a spiritual activity, beholding love as the substance of all that is, no matter what form it may be. This month, this year, always, if we choose to practice love, beginning with self-love, keeping that sponge moistened so we can accept in more and give out more, considering an altar of love and laying our burdens down on that altar of love, and coming up with different ways of approaching situations where we come face to face with the bear. Instead of asking, how can I prove how right I am, maybe ask, how can I bring more love into this situation? Instead of asking, how can I make sure we win, remembering everyone is going to that final destination together and asking, how can I connect? How can I listen with new ears that are not threatened and feeling like a bear is attacking me? How can I create a new experience in this new story of interbeingness? How can I live and emulate this new story that I chose to call for this experience love for all and all for love. How can we make that happen? And I'd like to close. This is a poem that shows that the mystics have been telling us this for way, way longer than we realize. This was written by St. John of the Cross. He lived from 1542 to 1591. And it's the same message wrapped up in a poem called Beloved. God held the earth as if it were its lover, and spoke with the most tender of feelings to all in existence as God spoke to me. Look, dear one, I have made a bride for you, but she is shy, so how are you going to consummate? I want all souls to consummate with me, so I devised a plan. As each soul nears heaven, differences will dissolve to such a sublime extent that when the heart looks upon any object in this world, it will cry, beloved, and passionately run into an embrace with me. That blessed grace I now know. I now see my beloved everywhere, and so it is.